Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 6th annual RAVE Summit. It's so nice to see many of you for the first time today and some of you returning after a really energizing morning. As Helen just mentioned, I will reinforce briefly that we are recording, so please be aware of that. And if you just take a moment and double check and make sure that unless you're presenting that you are in fact muted right now as we're moving through, that would be great. In one moment, I'm going to introduce our speaker for this session on barriers for African immigrants and refugees. Before I do, I'll just mention that as Dr. Derby is moving through this presentation, I'll be monitoring the chat for questions and insights that are coming in from our audience. So feel free to drop thoughts and questions there as the presentation is ongoing, and then we'll make sure to collect those for Dr. Derby as well at the end. So at this time, it gives me a lot of pleasure to introduce Dr. Derby, who is president of the African Community Network. She's professor of sociology and criminal justice at Virginia State University, where she serves as a department chair. Dr. Derby is a Fulbright Scholar and researches human trafficking and other forms of migration. Previously, she worked on a 3-year State Department-funded project that removed over 350 children from servitude in Ghana. Dr. Derby, it's so wonderful to have you with us today, and I will hand things over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I thank the organizers of this program, Reestablish Richmond, Kate, Helen, and everybody, and all the committee members for putting this wonderful program together. I also thank my colleagues from the African Community Network for joining me today. Thank you so much. So you've given the introduction, but I have with me here my 3 colleagues. Dr. Henry Amedike, who is a family communications coordinator at the Virginia Commonwealth University Medical Center here in Richmond. We also have with us Dr. Kamgia, Dr. Pierre Kamgia, who is the auditor and vice chair of our education committee, African Community Network. He's a physician and eye surgeon, as well as an engineer. He's all over. And we have Mr. Jakaria Konate, who is the vice president of ACN. Mr. Konate. He holds a BS degree in nursing, an MS degree in health sciences, and he recently graduated from kinesiology with a Master of Science degree. They will be speaking after this brief presentation that I'll be giving. So who are we? Who are the African Community Network? This is an organization that has been in existence for about 10 years here in the Richmond metropolis. We serve the African community and other minorities that might need our help. We, Africa has about 54 countries, I believe. We are aware of this, and those countries have representatives here. We have individual countries that actually have their own organizations and which serve as members of this community. We also have individual African members of this community network. So African immigrant population in the United States. United States has about 4.6 million, and this is according to Pew Studies, which was based not on the most recent census, but on a research conducted in 2019. So this is technically an outdated statistic, which means that we might be more than that. We have about 4.6 million Black immigrants here in the United States. Out of that, about 2.2 million, and a little over that right now, is from Sub-Saharan Africa. And then out of that, in Virginia, we have about 2.2% of Virginia's 8.6 million residents originating from Sub-Saharan Africa. Majority of these populations are located in north of Virginia. Give me a second. So I'm trying to, my screen, I can see what I have here myself. All right. African immigrants at the moment are the largest immigrants, Black immigrants to the United States. As of 2000, for instance, we had just about 51% of all US immigrants being Blacks. That has reduced Today we have only 25%. In 2000 or before 2000, we had just about 25% of the immigrants from the African communities or African countries being here. Today it has increased to over 40%. And if you look at the map that I have on the board right now, we have all the populations actually seeing a reduction in their immigration populations here in the United States, but that of Africa is actually going on. So how did we get to where we are right now? Africans have come to the United States through various strategies or modes of migration. We have those who came in here for purposes of economic refugeeism. There are those who came here as political refugees, and there are those who came as international students and ended up staying after their education to contribute to the American economy. So there are so many of us who have come for various reasons. And I believe that as volunteers, you have worked predominantly with those who came in for economic purposes, as well as the political refugees who came from Darfur, who came from Liberia, Sudan, and other African communities. We have the Ethiopians also. But there are also those who come here for the opportunities I've talked about, education. And when we arrive, we benefit from several other opportunities that serve as the push or pull factors. Push factors in the sense that those factors, those attractive conditions here in the United States bring some of us here, whereas in some cases, we have some factors on the grounds in our respective countries that push us away from our countries, like war-torn conditions. We have famine, we have other economic conditions or political reasons for which might drive people to leave their native countries. What challenges and obstacles do we face when they come here, either as refugees, as volunteer immigrants, or as international students? The first thing that I talk about is culture shock and the differences. Whenever I mention culture, hello? Is anybody talking to me?
I think we're good. I think just an adjustment on the muting.
Oh, okay. Some come here, I mean, when we arrive, whenever I talk about culture shock and differences, the first response I get is everybody experiences culture shock, but the conditions of culture shock tends to be different for everybody, for individuals. Culture shock is usually dependent on your level of exposure. How much you know of the country that is receiving you or your destination? How much educated are you, or how well informed are you about the conditions on the other side? People respond to culture shocks differently. There are those who are able to, overcome it within days, but there are those whose experiences of culture shock may linger on for several years and even decades to come. And that's because we encounter it differently. Our backgrounds tend to be different. Your ability to overcome the culture shocks may also determine how well you are to integrate, to settle, and to progress or advance as either refugees or volunteer immigrant. And I have here, this is a very common picture that I have. Africa is not a country, and I believe I may be preaching to the choir. Why do I say that? We've heard several times that Africa isn't a country. We are 54 countries. Even within individual countries, we have so many different cultures. In Ghana alone, we have over 50 languages, and I refuse to say dialects because, why must we demean other cultures' languages and then let people believe that they are not advanced languages enough? They are languages, right? So Ghana has over 50 languages. Nigeria has even more. South Africa has more, Liberia, all the African countries have multiple cultures that set individuals and groups apart, even within their countries. So when they come here and we lump them together in the provision of resources, that might not be so successful or effective because of the differences we have on the African continent. More often than not, the ignorance about Africa being 54 countries also is intercepted by the fact that people think Africa is just maybe a period sign or a little circle on the map. They forget that it is a very huge land of many countries. I remember a few years ago when Nelson Mandela passed away, I was in Ghana for my own family's funeral and a relative's funeral. And when I got back, a church member just asked me, did you go to the funeral? And I asked, yes, my uncles, and said, no, I'm talking about the other one, Nelson Mandela's funeral. And I'm like, I was in Ghana. I said, yeah, but you could have gone South Africa. Between South Africa and Ghana is more like traveling from here, maybe to the United States, to UK or to Hawaii. It's really far. The distance, right? People don't know that. So when we are providing services, we must be mindful of this, the fact that the differences in cultures, the distance among populations on the African continent makes it difficult for us to identify one unique resource for all of them. We need to understand the backgrounds. Stereotyping. Some of the participants I spoke to in the study that is still ongoing spoke about their experiences with culture, racism, well, stereotyping, racism, and discrimination. A sad narrative that I heard was about this young lady who said that she came from, she's a Liberian who lived in Sierra Leone and emigrated to the United States as a refugee. Of course, when we arrive as refugees, there are so many resources, and we are very grateful for that. All the participants spoke about how well they were received and how well they were supported to settle. But this particular incident, she came here, spent a few years, got married, had kids, and one time she went to work. This was during the Ebola outbreak in Liberia. And she said that she got a call that her daughter, her toddler, was sick. And the first thing her supervisor said was, oh, she must have Ebola. That really freaked her out. All right. So we all are, at times you get to communities, you get into groups, even at the workplace, the questions you are asked, the stereotyping can be so discouraging, can place obstacles in our way as far as integration. Brain waste. We are often concerned about brain drain on the continent, but brain drain exists only when the intellectuals, the highly trained Africans, are being removed from Africa or from any country for that matter, and being placed in their skills of education. Africa has so many universities, well-resourced universities. In fact, in a cross-section of the literature, Africa is considered the cradle of scholarship in the whole world. And so when some migrants come here and they are not able to find the jobs that they were trained in, it is really disappointing. We have so many well-trained professionals, and I am not disparaging any specific profession, but there are medical doctors, university professors, lawyers, accountants, trained nurses, licensed nurses who migrate to the United States and are not able to fit into their fields of profession and end up, as I said, I'm not disparaging any profession, end up as bus drivers or taxi cab drivers, or find themselves as home health aides, which will be way below their training or what they were experienced for before they arrived. They find challenges for licensing. At interviews, you have to think, you have to present yourself, you have to interact as Americans, but this will be disconnections that they may not have been aware of prior to migrating to the United States. And then, of course, language barriers. Those who are able to settle easily tend to come from countries that have accepted English language as their official language. They train in it, and even that in some cases, especially those who are coming as students, they will have to prove that they have been training in English. For example, you have somebody migrating to the United States to study in the university, or probably the bachelor's degree coming in to study for a master's or a doctoral degree. That person may still be required to take TOEFL, English as a second language, but the entire time they have been speaking and using English language. So these are some of the barriers that African immigrants encounter, which make it very difficult for them to settle and to advance and take all the opportunities that they may have. I spoke about culture earlier, the cultural differences. One of the participants, or even multiple participants, spoke about their family getting disintegrated after they arrived. The reason, because they believe that their wives may have found new rights that they did not. And this is, I believe, cultural differential problem that they may be having. It's not that America is providing them weapons to fight their husbands, but maybe they become more enlightened to understand that as a woman, I need to engage this way or that way to become professionally independent. But in some cultures, in some religious groups, that might be a challenge for the women, because they are supposed to, in some African cultures, even in the 21st century, women are supposed to be seen and not heard. And that becomes a problem once they find their voice upon arrival in the United States. So I leave those to my colleagues, Dr. Amedeke, Dr. Kamgia, and Mr. Konati, to give their responses on some of the issues that I have talked about. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Derby. And before we move over to panelists, we have just one question in the chat for you. Amanda is asking, how widespread is the sentiment that people from Africa identify by tribe first versus by country?
How widespread they are identified by tribe first? I don't even realize that they are identified even by tribe. They are more typically identified by their country. Tribe, I would say, when they lump everybody as one tribe, as the tribe Africa. But that is so non-existent, because we have so many tribes, we have so many ethnic groups within each country. In Ghana, for instance, I can think of about maybe 30 ethnic groups with distinct cultural practices that are becoming diffused in today's Ghana because of because of technology, because of travel, and because of acceptance of each other's practices. But Africa is so diverse, super diverse, and not
absolutely. And is your sense that folks in those different ethnic groups might identify themselves as from Ghana first, or are they more likely to talk about their ethnic group first and then Ghana? Amanda, let me know if I'm misrepresenting.
I think that's what right. When they are not, it depends on the circumstance. If they relate within, say, Ghanaian circles, they are going to identify their tribes. But outside of Ghanaian circles, they would identify as Ghanaian. Nigerians will do the same. You don't hear them going about saying, I'm a Yoruba or I'm an Igbo, because they believe that people might not know. They identify first as Nigerians before the tribes or ethnic groups would come in.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much.
Can I just comment on that briefly? Okay, so these tribes, yes, there are so many thousands of tribes that makes up the African continent. And it goes way back to the time of colonization. Tribes were living in isolation by themselves and doing their economic, social activities by themselves until the Europeans came in and colonization came in. So these tribes, you can see different tribes where about 2, 3, 4, 5, or 10 tribes will be brought together to form this new grouping called country. So apparently, yes, they belong to the country, but also they sometimes identify themselves on tribal basis, just because naturally that is where they feel they belong. But patriotism also comes in when we want to talk about country. So we all belong to one country, but there are different. So I can easily identify myself on tribal basis. Sometimes even if I meet like Professor Debbie, I hear Professor Debbie's name and I know this is somebody who comes from Ghana, and I can easily even identify her by the Nana says, oh, okay, he's from Ghana and he's from the Akan tribe, you know, and he can see my name and be able to identify me on the tribal basis or the ethnic group basis. I'm an Ewe, and I come from Ghana, Volta region of Ghana, which forms the eastern border with Togo. So when during colonization, a little bit of history here briefly, the Germans took over part of that whole region where the Ewes are, and they divided that into two. And the French pick one, the Germans pick one, but after sometimes the Germans sold their portion to the French. And then the portion that came to Ghana was taken over by the British. So as a result of that, part of my ethnic group are in Togo and part is also in Ghana. So when I see somebody from Togo who speaks Ewe, I'm easily able to identify with such a person. And like Prof said, when we travel outside, we can easily identify on tribal basis, but also when it comes to working together as Africans or people from one country, we are easily able to come together. So yes, we identify by tribal, but we are also identified when it comes to term of being patriotic to the country of our countries of origin or our continent of origin.
That's such a really rich answer to Amanda's question. Thank you both so much. And Dr. Derby, I think you're muted.
Yeah. So for the panelists, I don't know which one of you will go first. Dr. Temgia, are you ready?
Well, I'm ready. I followed your presentation. It's a very good presentation. Thank you for having invited me to this, and thank the organizers for this event. It's something which I think contributes to the understanding between people. On the challenges that African immigrants face in the United States, they are of the same kind that any other group faces, with the addition of stereotyping and discrimination, which goes generally with the African race throughout this planet. At least that's my observation, that's my take on it. As Dr. Nana said, Africans immigrate here in several categories. The category of professionals is one that, in my view, has the most, missed opportunities, in the sense that you have very achieved professionals who come here, and generally they have to start over again at the bottom of the ladder. And eventually they arrive, they climb the steps, and they gain positions like the one that Dr. Nana is in right now. But believe me, it's twice or three times as difficult as a Native American would be, especially an American who is not of the Black race. And so that's something that is to be taken into consideration when we consider programs to interact with these communities. One aspect of this that is dear to me, and that relates to me also personally, is that I believe most professional Africans who are in the United States and have immigrated and made the United States their home, that was generally not their original intention. Originally, most of us came here to acquire additional expertise to contribute to the development of Africa and our various countries. But the international make of things is such that a lot of us find ourselves basically in a dilemma to either stay here and help financially and otherwise, or return to Africa and face a significant number of difficulties, some of which are political. And in that respect, the US unknowingly may have contributed to some of those things, because a lot of the very brilliant Africans who find themselves here in their countries are generally not well seen by local governments. A lot of them are seen as troublemakers because they have views that in the past would have been associated with communism, socialism, and things like that. And with the Cold War and the I would say contest between the two blocks, it ended up being that a lot of very valuable Africans had no place to go except to find themselves as exiles. So to the extent that this can help understand that what a powerful country that like the United States does on the world stage impacts those immigrants and those countries, I think if this can raise an awareness of that, that would be very helpful. That is, to summarize, I think the US will do a very good job by trying to find ways that a lot of the brains from Africa that are in this country can contribute to their countries being physically there. So I don't know if my intervention here has been all over the map. I hope that the message is understood that we face significant challenges here in all groups, but especially the professional groups. Well, when we say bottom, that's too judgmental. I would say at the other end of the spectrum, there are those who come here and who really find opportunities here that they would not have found in their original land. And that's something to be commended. I think the United States has been the cradle of that type of uplifting of people who were desperate elsewhere. On the other hand, as I said, there are people who could have contributed a whole lot more in their countries who also find themselves here for the reasons that I have explained. Don't want to be too long here. If there are specific questions that we can address, I'll be more than happy to do so. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Dr. Amireke, you have any contribution on that topic, or you move to the next one on the issue?
I think he has really expanded much on that, which is good. Apparently, the challenges that we face can vary. Let me say, between the year 2009 and 2012, I did work with the recent African immigrants in the Richmond metropolis as part of my Doctor of Ministry project. And I noticed that normally when Africans come here, especially those who came in those years whereby the civil wars that took place on part of the African continent, Burundi, Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Liberia, those wars brought in a lot of refugees, and part of them found themselves through the United Nations Refugee Program here in the Richmond area. And I was working then with the North American Mission Board. So I was part of the coordinating body team that was helping provide resources for some of these people who come in and are displaced by this civil war. And I realized that when they come in, yes, resources that are made available to them through the United Nations Refugees Program, through the United Nations US aid program and all that, becomes very, very inadequate. And so they find themselves wanting, even as they go along. And most of them, like we have said, has language issues that cannot even help them to even get jobs. And it's very, very hard for them. And one thing also that I noticed is that working with the religious organizations in the metropolis to provide these resources, most of the churches and other religious groups, what they are concerned about is just, I want to bring this person to Christ, and I want to just take that person over to the house and feed that person and bring that person back home and all that, which, yes, those things are needed. But I would say that the challenges that they face mostly when they come is companionship. Companionship, somebody that would develop a long-term relationship with them so that the person can help them acculturate with the culture, the macro culture that they find themselves in, and how to establish themselves so that they can live on their own. These are people who had jobs, who had good livelihood, and were displaced by these unfortunate circumstances. So the challenge is that when they come, we don't just see them as people. People just see them as people who lack and who have poverty in their country, so they are here and they throw anything at all on them. But the most important one is developing that long-term relationship and helping them to establish so they can take care of themselves as well. Those are some of the challenges that we face. But we can move on to the next if anybody has not have anything to say on that.
Thank you so much. So I'll give it to Mr. Kanate just to, I believe that we've exhausted this topic. So Jakaria, would you kindly move on to the next issue that you believe creates barriers for African immigrants in the United States?
Thank you for allowing me to intervene here. I just want to elaborate quickly on different type of reason why you already mentioned it. If I want to break it down a little bit further, some immigrate based on religious oppressions, because in their country, beside the political, but there's also a religious entity, they're not allowed to practice freely in their religions. So some immigrate for that reason. Also, some immigrate in this for social, because social discrimination or social practice within their tribe. People who emancipate, they view their own tribal practice as not reasonable. They might see it as an oppression for women, or either a reason for polygamy or women excisions. Some of these tribal practice, some people migrate for that reason. Also, another barrier in Africa, communications is limited because of our infrastructure. All right, so a distance from here to California is very large, but you can easily find a flight or find a mean. The highways are developed versus some African country. You may be neighbor to another country, but the infrastructure is so difficult that people don't move freely between countries. Okay, so God has blessed Africa with multiple tribes and ethnic, but this bless is also a problem because we're so diverse. It's difficult to unite in some circumstances. Okay, this is forever. We're talking about African unity, united of Africa, but it's still a challenge for us. So when we come here in the United States, we, ACN, we are trying to bring all the African together under the same umbrella so that we be heard. We be heard, our voice can be heard. We come as a unison. We become we can dissimulate our culture and become, our voice can be heard if we all come together.
Thank you.
One quick thing I want to add to this, Dr. Derby mentioned it, the language problem. So it's already difficult for those English-speaking country for their diploma, for their skill to be recognized. Imagine those countries in Africa that came here, they only speak in other language like French, or they don't speak English. Imagine how much difficulty they're going through. That's what I want to mention.
Thank you so much. So does anybody else have anything to say about the experiences they may have encountered with stereotyping, discrimination, and racism with the kind of populations or groups you've worked with in your respective careers? Have you encountered any narratives that you want to share?
If I may, a question, what do the panel members think generally of whether most African immigrants are here by choice or because of constraints?
Yeah, apparently, let me see if I'm on mute. Yeah, I think I categorize the groups in two. There are people who are here by choice, and also there are people who come here just because they have been displaced by circumstances and situations, like has been said, economic hardship, some political instability, civil wars, and drought, famine, like Dr. Debbie had already stated. But also, there are those who come in here just to pursue education, like you said. I don't know if that is what you still want us to stress on, or there is something else that you would want us to talk. Education, visitation, through the diversity visa, lottery visa, and seeking greener pastures because of the hardship or economic hardship that they find in their countries. So they come in here just to go to school. That is why you will see an African here, he'll be working 2 jobs and at the same time going to school, pursuing the best of degrees or the best of professions that they might get so that they can fit into the economy. And those people, when they come, yes, they want to also support back home, and they are people back home are expecting from them. So they want to do everything within their means to make sure that they get the profession, the qualification, the skills that they need to be able to find jobs and to do, so that they can support their respective families back home as well.
My question was because I have the impression from interacting with Africans generally that a lot of us are here not because they really wanted to leave their countries and relocate here, but by necessity, and that if things had been different, if they had the choices, they would rather be back home, as the expression always, usually says. So that was the essence of my question. And that is to say that if somehow we could convince the various governments to help make conditions that people can actually stay with their families, the problem of immigration in the United States would not be as acute as it is. So that's.
Yes, it is. It's okay. It's okay. It's good that you brought that up, and you can see that right here down here now in the 21st century, most Africans who have really made their wealth and have been able to acquire their knowledge and also acquire professions and things are returning home. Yes, like you said, sometimes it's very frustrating when they get home and see that the system is not working well to their favor. So mentioning that political situation, it is also very vital that maybe one day we need to look at and talk about in details. But yes, people wish they go back home. Home is home. Yes, we have here, the United States, we are living here and making our life and bringing up our families here. But when you go home and situations are right, you feel at home. So, right. Yes, very important.
Thank you. Just to add a little bit more perspective to the question or the issue of choice and being compelled by circumstances to leave. Whether, even when people volunteer by choice, there are still circumstances. That's what I refer to as the push factors from home. There's always a reason, and there's always, home is home for everybody. Everybody sees their country, irrespective of challenges, as the best place to be. Unfortunately, many African countries have resources, have most of the world's natural resources: gold, bauxite, vegetation, oil. But it's more like the more they find or discover these resources to explore, the more cursed they seem to be. And that's because we haven't been able to identify the best leadership clique to lead the country. Every leader that comes in and preaches about fighting corruption ends up being the worst corrupt leader to ever be on the continent. So these are the reasons why they migrate also here. And then there is also the reasons why some of them even find barriers here in this country, because the more they work, the more they have to support relatives back home, because they are left behind encountering the corrupt leadership and not being able to access the resources that they have. But one thing that I may have left out on my presentation was the duality of the identities that we have. And this is what characterizes that dual identities of Africans in the United States, because they are obliged to live and support themselves here, but there is also the need for them to focus on necessities back home. And then they have the challenge of having to work extra hard to be able to get little promotion relative to others. There are some who have told me about the being, very close to promotion. They'll be the ones training new employees, but the new employees end up being promoted, not because the African is not working hard, not because they are not qualified to be, but because of the stereotypes and the discrimination that they encounter. Thank you.
Can you talk about that, my own experience on stereotyping, discrimination, and racism? Nana, if you allow me. Okay. Yes, I did 26 years in the military, United States military, not African military. I retired as a major. One day, I was the service chief here in Virginia, pediatric clinic. Okay, and a lady came. We do immunizations up to 3 p.m. and then, but the clinic need time to document from 3 to 4. She came in and my nurse told her it's already past 3. We cannot do any more vaccination for the children. And she asked them, she really insists that the child get the vaccination because she came from a long distance. So let me see the supervisor. When I came, the nurse called me and I came at trying to explain to the lady that, ma'am, sorry, the immunization clinic is closed and you're gonna have to come back the next day. She looked at my, military, we are identified by the last name. And during my citizenship, they offer me, the United States, I think they're aware that they offer you to change, if you want to change your last name, you're allowed to do that during your naturalization process. But I choose to keep most African, we choose to keep our last name as is. So, Konate, she like, no, let me see. I need to talk to the supervisor now because I said, ma'am, sorry, I'm the supervisor. Sorry, the clinic is closed. And many other instances beside that, when we get promoted, we have to send the promotion package after a certain level, but after you reach certain grade, you just have to send your package with your picture, your name, what you have accomplished. Generally, you get discriminated. It's sad to say, the Army fight against that. There's even a committee for equal opportunity in the military. But beside that, it's something that's still a challenge in the United States military and many armed forces.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. We are almost running out of time. If any member on here has a question, they may just type it in the chat and we will hear it. Maybe at this point, I need to also talk a bit more about some of the things that the community has done to support the members. We have, and this is usually country specific also, as well as ACN trying to get a few things off the ground to support our members. We have some that are trying to, in fact, there's an investment group in one of the countries supporting the members. They talked about insurance to support members, and then many more. Please, you have any questions for us?
Yeah, let me also add up to that. Apart from what the ACN is doing, I will also give a shout out to other agencies that are here that we really have the community as a coordinate with to support our members. I would say the Red Cross, the Virginia Council of Churches, the Catholic Relief Agency, some refugee settlement programs that come, the Salvation Army, Community of Volunteer Services. I mean, almost all those agencies also come handy when they support, to support members of the African community, and we would not go without saying thank you to them for what they do. There are several things that come in place. Sometimes when we get some of those supports, that's also a different thing altogether, where people think that, oh, because you are here, you need support, they give you anything. Or sometimes uniforms, clothing, you go into their closet and just pull out anything. If it is not good for you to use and started, and then you can't give it to anybody else, not only Africans, but anybody at all. And so some of those challenges that we face are those, but agencies are here and we collaborate with them to support the community as best as we can in terms of health screening, medical assistance, some social services, some temporary housing, employment services. The ESL is a big one, it's a key one. The English as a second language is a key one, and that is also very agencies that are there that are helping as we do the transport services and all that. So yes, thank you for everything that is being done for us, but also we hope that we would continue the best that we can. If anybody has any questions, yes, we are ready to kind of.
Okay, before that, so I left out AfroFest and the various events that we have as African community. So we do have the health fair, typically in March, April, we have that. We've been organizing youth leadership program for our youth. We have youth behavioral training that takes place every summer for our youth. That is to educate them on substance abuse in an effort for us to prevent it from among the youth. We also have the annual AfroFest, which is a festival of African cultures. We celebrated this year. It's going to take place on September 9th. It's huge. We get over 1,500 participants. So we encourage those of you who are in the area to please join us on September 9th, and then we will send out more flyers through Reestablish Richmond. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Derby. And I think we're seeing one final question, and some helpful resources are starting to go into the chat, but resources for further insight, books, web courses. There might be some things on your website, it looks like.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much.
Perfect. Well, thank you all. This has just been a really robust, fabulous panel to hear from and to have you all sharing your experiences with us. It feels like a really exciting opportunity to keep thinking about further connections, as well as you all are talking about the importance of companionship and community, especially.